You never forget the sound of a courtroom. The echo of footsteps, the quiet shuffle of papers, the weight of judgment hanging in the air. That morning I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just an old carpenter, no suit, no lawyer, just calloused hands and a heart that still believed in fairness. My son sat at the front, pale, holding onto his crutches. Across the aisle, his wife wore that same proud smile that once fooled all of us. And when I walked through those wooden doors, the judge, a man I'd never met outside of a single job 20 years ago, looked up from his bench. He froze, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Pierce, you built my home." That's when the room fell silent. No one laughed, no one moved, because in that one sentence, everything changed: respect, truth, and the kind of justice you can't buy. Before we start this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever done something good, something small, that nobody seemed to remember? This one's for you. If stories about quiet strength and family justice speak to your heart, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's begin. It was one of those mornings where even the air felt heavy. The courthouse was packed, rows of strangers whispering behind their masks of curiosity. Some came for gossip, some for judgment, but none of them really knew the story they were about to witness. Melissa sat at the front, legs crossed, tapping her manicured nails against the table. The woman had that kind of calm that comes from thinking you've already won. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something that made her smirk. The look in her eyes said everything: cold, polished, untouchable. And then there was my son, Daniel, my boy, 40 years old, walking with a cane that looked too heavy for him. His shoulders used to be broad, proud. Now they curved like the frame of a house left out in the rain too long. I could see the pain in his face, but I also saw something deeper: shame. He didn't want me there. Not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't want his old man to see him like this. The judge entered, papers in hand, glasses sliding down his nose. Edward Blake, I hadn't seen him in over 2 decades. I remember building his house, out by the edge of town. I still recall how his wife wanted the porch just wide enough to catch the afternoon light. Funny how the details that stay with you aren't the ones people expect. When I stepped into that courtroom, the floor creaked beneath my boots. Everyone turned. You'd think they'd never seen a man in his 60s wearing a flannel shirt to a divorce hearing. I didn't plan to speak, I was just there for moral support. But the moment our eyes met, the judge froze. His expression shifted from routine authority to disbelief. "Mr. Pierce," he said slowly, lowering his glasses. Then softer, almost to himself, "You built my home 20 years ago." The room fell into silence. Every head turned toward me, the air holding its breath. Even Melissa stopped smirking. I nodded politely. "Yes, sir," I said, voice steady but quiet. "That was a long time ago." He blinked, trying to place the memory. "Why are you here?" And that was the moment everything changed. Because in his tone, a mix of shock and respect, the entire courtroom realized I wasn't just some old man tagging along to watch his son lose everything. Melissa's brows furrowed, irritation flickering behind her perfect composure. You could tell she didn't like not knowing something. People like her hate surprises. They live their lives making sure every piece on the board moves when they say so. But that day, the board wasn't hers anymore. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispering, "Dad, you didn't have to come." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "I know," I said, "but I built this family. I won't watch it crumble." The lawyer's slick suit, expensive haircut gave me the kind of look you give to someone you underestimate. He leaned toward Melissa, muttering something about keeping things professional. I didn't mind. I'd been underestimated my whole life, by clients who thought I was just a carpenter, by people who thought building meant hammering nails, not holding foundations together, literal and human. The judge cleared his throat. "Let's proceed." His voice carried that subtle change, the one people use when they've suddenly remembered they are in the presence of someone they owe something to. As testimony began, I stayed quiet in the back, hands folded, listening. Every word felt like a chisel scraping at the truth. Melissa painted Daniel as incapable, a man broken by his accident, unable to provide, unfit to raise his own daughter. Each sentence hit harder than any fall I'd ever taken from a scaffold. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. He'd lost his voice long before we ever entered this room. I caught Melissa's eye once, just once, and that was enough. Because behind her calm there was fear, a flicker she couldn't hide. People like her, they sense when something solid starts to move under their feet. The truth has weight, and that day it was shifting. When the hearing paused for recess, Daniel turned to me. "Dad, please just let it go. I don't want you dragged into this." I smiled, tired but sure. "Son, you forget who taught you to hold a level. When something tilts, you fix it. You don't walk away." He sighed, but his eyes softened, that same look he used to give me when he was little, and I told him the monsters under the bed couldn't hurt him. Only now the monsters were real. As we waited for court to resume, I looked around that cold, sterile room. Every inch of it built by someone like me, men who worked with their hands, whose names nobody remembers. But without us, there would be no walls, no roof, no justice hall to stand in. I could feel the stares, the whispers. Who is he? Why did the judge react like that? Is he someone important? I almost laughed. Important. If only they knew how many homes I'd built for families who now pretend they did it all themselves. The judge returned, eyes finding me again before he spoke. "We'll continue this afternoon." His voice held a note of respect he hadn't shown to anyone else that morning. As people stood to leave, Melissa brushed past me, perfume sharp and confident. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed quietly. "This isn't your fight." I met her gaze, steady as a stone wall. Everything built on lies becomes my fight. Her smile faltered for the first time. Daniel whispered, "Dad," but I shook my head gently. "Don't worry, son. I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm just here to remind them what real foundations look like." When the doors closed behind us, I could still feel the weight of those eyes, the curiosity, the unease, the dawning realization. People forget. They forget who built their houses, who paved their roads, who taught them the meaning of honest work. But I don't forget. Because every nail I drove, every wall I raised, it wasn't just wood and steel. It was a promise. A promise that truth, no matter how buried, can always be rebuilt. So when they ask me why I'm here, my answer is simple. I'm here because the house my son built, his life, his marriage, his peace is cracking. And when something you built starts to break, you don't walk away. You pick up your tools and you start again. And maybe if you've ever had to rebuild something that mattered, a home, a family, a piece of yourself, you'll understand. Because this story isn't just mine. It could be yours too. Gentle pause, voice softens. If you've ever stood alone and fought for what you built, don't forget to tell me where you're listening from. Maybe we've built more in common than you think. When I think back on it now, the town looked different then. Smaller, quieter. The kind of place where everyone knew who built what. You couldn't drive 5 blocks in Riverside without passing something I had a hand in, a library, a school gym, the old bridge with the copper railings that shine orange at sunset. Every nail, every beam, every drop of sweat, a piece of my life was in those walls. But none of that compared to the house by the river. That was our place, mine, my wife Ellen, and our boy Daniel. I started building it when she got sick. The doctors said terminal, and the word just hung there like dust that wouldn't settle. I couldn't fix her, but I could build something she'd leave behind. Something strong enough to hold him when I no longer could. She used to sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching me cut boards until the sun disappeared behind the pines. She'd smile and say, "You're building your heart right into those walls, Sam." Maybe she was right. After she passed, the house became quieter than I ever imagined possible. The kind of quiet that hums inside your bones. Daniel was 15, too young to lose his mother, too old to show he was breaking. I found him one night sitting on the half-finished deck, staring at the stars. He said, "Dad, do you think she can still see us?" I told him, if she can, she'll want to see us keep building. We worked side by side that summer, finishing every corner of that house together. I taught him how to level a beam, how to read the grain of wood, how to tell if a wall was true just by running your fingers along it. He was good at it, better than me, even. But what I really wanted him to learn wasn't in the wood or the plans. It was in the pause between hammer strikes, the patience, the care. I used to tell him, "Son, honesty builds everything, not just houses, everything. The moment you lie, the moment you cut corners, the structure starts to rot, even if it still looks perfect on the outside." He nodded, even if I wasn't sure he understood back then. Kids rarely do. When we finally finished that little house by the river, it wasn't fancy. Just 2 bedrooms, a porch that creaked when you stepped on the 3rd board, and a small apple tree Ellen had planted before she got sick. But it felt alive. You could feel her there. I remember Daniel standing at the door, looking proud in that quiet way he had. He said, "Someday I'll build something even stronger, Dad." I smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Then make sure its foundation is made of respect." He laughed, the kind of laugh that still had hope in it. "Respect, huh? That's all. That's everything," I told him. That night we sat on the porch together, listening to the river move. It was the first time since Ellen's funeral that I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. The sky was wide and clear, and for a few quiet minutes it felt like she was still there, in the air, in the wood, in the rhythm of the water against the rocks. Years passed, and Daniel grew into the kind of man any father would be proud of. He went to college, studied engineering. He wanted to design buildings, not just build them. "Bigger things," he said, "bridges that last 100 years. When he graduated, I gave him my old hammer. The handle was worn smooth, the initials SP carved into the side. He held it like it was something holy. "You really want me to have this?" he asked. "It built everything I love," I said. "Now it's your turn." He took it with both hands, careful, almost reverent. That's when I knew he understood. A few years later, he met Melissa. She was charming, polite, the kind of woman who made everyone feel small but special. Daniel adored her. I tried to like her, I really did, but something about her eyes always made me uneasy. They looked at people the way a buyer looks at property, appraising the value. Still, she made my son happy, and that was enough for me. They bought a house together not far from mine. I helped Daniel fix it up. He was always busy, always on site somewhere, designing or building, but every few weeks he'd come by, hand Lily a wooden toy he'd carved, and sit for coffee. He'd tell me about his projects, bridges, apartment complexes, contracts with city planners. He was building his own world now, and I couldn't have been prouder. Sometimes when I saw him smile across that kitchen table, tired but content, I'd see flashes of Ellen in him, her steadiness, her quiet grace, and I'd think, "We did it, honey, we really did." That's the thing about building. It's never just about the wood or the nails. It's about the hands that hold them, the heart that chooses to keep going when everything else says stop. Back then, I didn't know how far those lessons would have to carry him or me. I didn't know that someday the same house that was supposed to protect him would become a battlefield. But on that summer night years ago, watching my boy trace his fingers along the wooden rail of the porch, I believed in that promise. The builder's promise. To build with honesty, to live with respect, and to never, ever walk away from what you've built. Because sometimes the most important thing you can teach your son isn't how to build something new. It's how to keep standing when everything you built starts to fall apart. It happened on one of those gray mornings when the sky feels heavy, like it knows something bad's about to happen. Daniel had been working on a downtown construction site, a new bridge project, the kind he used to get excited about. He called me that morning, said, "Dad, we're finally finishing the top section today." I told him to be careful, but he just laughed. "You raised me on ladders, remember?" Around noon, my phone rang again, but this time it wasn't him. It was his foreman. His voice was trembling so bad I could barely make out the words. "Mr. Pierce, there's been an accident." When I got there, the place was chaos, sirens, shouting, metal twisted like paper. They said the scaffolding collapsed when Daniel tried to pull a coworker to safety. I saw the stretcher before I saw my son. His helmet was cracked clean in half. His hands, the same hands that built homes and bridges, hung limp at his sides. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I only remember sitting in that hallway staring at the red light above the surgery door. Hours passed. People came and went. Coffee went cold in my hands. And then finally a doctor came out. His face told me everything before he even spoke. "He's alive, Mr. Pierce," he said quietly, "but his spinal cord, it's badly damaged. Your son won't walk again." The words didn't hit all at once. They sank in slow, like concrete setting. When they let me see him, he looked so small, swallowed by tubes and white sheets. His eyes fluttered open, and for a second I saw that same determined boy who used to carry lumber twice his size just to prove he could. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. I took his hand and said softly, "Don't you worry, son. We can rebuild anything, even you." He squeezed my hand, just once hard. The next few months blurred together, hospital rooms, physical therapy. Nights spent in a chair by his bed because I refused to leave him alone. I'd shave him in the mornings, help him sit up, listen to him cuss under his breath every time his legs refused to listen. At first, Melissa was there too, sweet, caring, always saying the right things. She brought flowers, joked with the nurses, smiled through her tears. Everyone told me how lucky Daniel was to have a wife like her. I wanted to believe it. But time changes people, especially when life stops giving them what they expected. After a while, she started spending less time at the hospital. "Just to clear my head," she'd say. "Just a quick dinner with friends." Daniel never complained. He'd just smile and say, "She deserves a break, Dad. I can't blame her." When he finally came home, I had remodeled the downstairs for him, wider doorways, lower counters, a small ramp off the porch. He thanked me, but I could see how much it hurt him. That house had always been a symbol of pride, and now it was a reminder of everything he'd lost. The first few weeks, Melissa played the perfect wife. She'd read to him in the evenings, help him stretch, cook his favorite meals. But little by little, the warmth faded. The laughter at dinner got shorter. The touches disappeared. I'd sit at the table with them, pretending not to notice the distance growing between them like a crack spreading through old concrete. She'd scroll on her phone while Daniel ate in silence. The clinking of his spoon against the bowl was the only sound in the room. One night, I walked in and found her standing by the window, staring out at the dark street. She didn't notice me at first. She was whispering into her phone. I couldn't hear much, just her tone, impatient, frustrated. When she turned around, she smiled that perfect smile and said, "Just talking to my sister." But the look in her eyes didn't match the words. Later that night, I sat in my workshop, staring at an old photograph Daniel at age 10, holding his first hammer, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. I'd written on the back of the photo, "For the day he builds something stronger than himself." Now I wondered if that day would ever come. Every morning after that, I made breakfast for the three of us. I'd pour coffee, fry eggs, try to fill the silence with small talk. But the silence always won. Melissa started coming home later and later. At first, she blamed work, then traffic, then just needing a little time alone. I saw the way Daniel looked at her when she'd walk through the door, hopeful, desperate, like a man waiting for someone to save him. But she'd just brush past him, kiss the top of his head, and head upstairs. I wanted to say something. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and remind her who he used to be, the man who worked 12-hour days to build the life she was standing in. But I didn't. Because Daniel still looked at her like she was the only light left in his world. So I swallowed my anger and kept quiet. One evening, I heard her laugh, a sharp, unfamiliar laugh coming from the porch. I looked out the window and saw her on the phone again, twirling her hair, smiling in that way people do when they forget someone's watching. Daniel was inside, struggling to pick up a dropped fork. The sound of metal hitting tile echoed through the kitchen, loud and lonely. I walked over and helped him. He looked up, trying to smile. "Guess I'm getting clumsier by the day," he said. I just shook my head and said softly, "No, son. The world's just gotten heavier." That night, when I went to bed, the house felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because I could feel something shifting. The warmth we'd built, the love that had filled those rooms, was slipping away, inch by inch. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something I didn't want to admit. You can rebuild a broken wall. You can patch up a cracked beam. But when the steel inside a person starts to bend sometimes, no matter how much you try, it never straightens again. It started on one of those nights when the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The kind of silence that makes you hear things you're not supposed to. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, when I heard Melissa's voice drift in from the living room. At first, I didn't mean to listen, but her tone, it wasn't the soft, tired voice of a wife anymore. It was sharp, cold, like glass. She was on the phone. "Once the divorce is done," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "the house is half mine. We'll sell it fast." I froze. My hand tightened around the rag until I could feel it twisting. Half mine. She said it like she built these walls, like her hands poured the foundation that Daniel and I laid together. This house wasn't just wood and stone. It was our blood, our sweat, our memories. The thought of her carving it up like a business deal made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt since Ellen's funeral. Melissa's laugh, light, almost playful, cut through the air. "No, he won't fight it," she said. "He's too weak now. I'll make sure of it." I stood there in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound beside her voice. My legs wanted to move, to storm in and say something, but my heart told me to wait. I needed to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She ended the call, her heels clicking across the tile as she walked upstairs. The moment her door shut, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were trembling. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was heartbreak. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the creak of the wood, the wind against the window, felt like the house itself was whispering to me. The home Daniel and I built with our bare hands was starting to sound hollow, like the spirit inside it was cracking along with us. The next morning I got up early to make breakfast. Old habits. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Daniel was still asleep, but I heard quiet footsteps padding down the hallway. It was Lily. She was 8, too young to carry the kind of sadness I saw in her eyes lately. She looked like her dad around the mouth, but her eyes, those were her mother's, only softer, kinder. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "You hungry?" She nodded, but her voice was small. "Grandpa, can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said, turning down the stove. She hesitated, glancing toward the stairs. "Mom told me, if someone asks, I have to say I want to live with her, that Daddy can't take care of me." My heart dropped. I turned slowly and she was standing there, wringing her little hands together, tears starting to fill her eyes. "But I don't want to lie," she said, her voice cracking. "I love Daddy. He takes care of me. I don't want to leave him." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, this little girl caught in a storm she didn't start. I wanted to scoop her up, tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't lie to her, not like her mother had. I knelt down beside her, my knees aching, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Hey," I said softly, "you don't have to lie for anybody, all right? You just tell the truth no matter what happens. That's what strong people do." She nodded, but her lip trembled. "Will they be mad at me?" I swallowed hard. "Maybe," I said, "but the truth's like a beam in a house, Lily. It might take a hit, but it never breaks." She gave a tiny smile, and for a moment I saw Daniel in her face, the same quiet courage. When she went back to her room, I stayed there staring at the table. My hand rested on the old wood, worn smooth over the years. It used to be the center of everything: birthdays, laughter, nights when Ellen would hum while Daniel built model bridges beside her. Now it just felt empty. Later that afternoon, I noticed something strange. A thin crack had formed along the kitchen wall, running from the corner of the ceiling down to the baseboard. I'd built enough houses to know that kind of crack didn't just appear overnight, but something about it felt alive, like it was mirroring what was happening inside these walls. Every day after that, I noticed more small things at first. A loose tile near the stairs, paint starting to bubble around the window frame. It was as if the house itself was protesting, groaning under the weight of betrayal. I caught Melissa once, standing in front of the mirror, practicing her smile, the one she used in public. She didn't notice me watching from the hallway. She adjusted her hair, tilted her chin, whispered something like, "Perfect." Then she walked out, perfume trailing behind her like smoke. That night at dinner, the air was heavy again. Daniel sat in his wheelchair, pushing food around his plate. Melissa scrolled through her phone, her face lit by the glow of the screen. Lily sat quietly between them, staring at her fork. The sound of metal against porcelain filled the room, clink, clink, clink. Each tap felt sharper, louder, echoing through the cracks in the walls. I watched Melissa stand up, untouched plate in hand. "I'm not hungry," she said. "I've got some calls to make." Daniel looked up, trying to smile, trying to hide the hurt in his eyes. "Sure," he said softly. When she was gone, the house felt colder. The silence stretched again. I could hear the river outside, faint and distant. Lily reached over and put her small hand on Daniel's. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I'll eat with you." Daniel smiled weakly. "Thank you, sweetheart." I turned away for a second, pretending to get more water, but really it was to hide the sting in my eyes. You spend your whole life building something, brick by brick, day by day, and you think it'll last forever, but it doesn't. Sometimes the first cracks don't show on the walls, they show in the people inside them. And when those cracks spread far enough, no matter how well you built it, even the strongest house starts to groan. That night, as I walked down the hall, I ran my hand along the cracked wall again. The surface was rough beneath my fingertips. I whispered, "Hang on, old friend," because I wasn't just talking to the house. I was talking to my family, what was left of it. That night the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on my workbench. I couldn't sleep, hadn't slept right in weeks. The kind of nights where your mind builds things it shouldn't. Regrets, memories, plans. I opened my old leather journal, the one Ellen gave me the year we built the river house. The pages smelled faintly of sawdust. My hands shook as I wrote, slow and deliberate. A true builder never runs, he rebuilds. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe a man my age had no business fighting battles that weren't his anymore. But when the walls start to crack, you don't stand there watching, you pick up your tools. The next morning, I drove into town to a little diner that hadn't changed since the 70s. The same chipped counter, the same coffee that tasted like burnt patience. That's where I found Harriet Monroe. Harriet and I go way back. She used to be a civil investigator, sharp as a nail, stubborn as oak. We'd worked on a few city projects together years ago before life took us different directions. I hadn't seen her since Ellen's funeral. She looked up as I walked in and gave me that half smile I remembered. "Samuel Pierce," she said, stirring her coffee. "You look like a man carrying more than lumber these days." I sat down across from her. "I need your help," I said simply. She studied me for a moment. "This about your son," I nodded, "and his wife." Her brow arched. "What's she done?" I took a deep breath. "She's selling the house out from under him, lying in court. And I think she's seeing someone else." Harriet leaned back, her expression softening just a bit. "You've got proof?" "Not yet," I said, "but I plan to." She smiled, that old fire lighting up behind her eyes. "Good. Then we build a case the same way you build a house, one solid piece at a time." That's the thing about Harriet, she never treated justice like paperwork. To her, it was carpentry with a conscience. Over the next few weeks, we worked quietly. Harriet pulled favors, checked public records, found property transfers and phone logs. I handled the rest the way I knew best, with my hands. While she chased paper trails, I stayed in my workshop. The same small shed I'd built decades ago, half tools, half memories. I fixed an old steel ruler that had bent years before. As I filed it straight, I noticed the grooves, small, worn marks I'd carved when teaching Daniel to measure properly. Accuracy isn't just in the numbers, I used to tell him. It's in the heart behind the work. Every mark, every scratch on that ruler had a story. Ellen's laugh when I built her garden bench too tall. Daniel's small hands gripping the hammer for the first time. The smell of cedar, the warmth of home. Now that same ruler became my reminder: precision, patience, purpose. Harriet would stop by some evenings with updates. "You were right," she said one night, dropping a folder on the bench. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Melissa and a man, Derek Sloan, at a restaurant downtown, his hand on hers, the kind of touch you don't mistake for business. Derek was a name I recognized. Real estate director, wealthy, charming, the kind of man who builds fortunes out of other people's roofs. "She's been meeting him for months," Harriet said. "Bank transactions too, she's moving money." I felt my stomach twist, not out of surprise, out of confirmation. The truth hurts less when you already knew it, but it still cuts deep. I thanked her, then sat there in silence for a long time after she left. I pulled out the old blueprints of our house, the original sketches I'd drawn with Ellen the year we broke ground. The paper had yellowed, the edges frayed, but the lines were still clean, strong, honest. I laid them flat on the table and began to draw over them again, this time not for repair or design. I labeled each wall, each beam, each room with a name. Pierce V. Pierce Justice Design. Every note was symbolic. North wall, truth. South beam, evidence. Foundation, family. Roof, legacy. It wasn't architecture anymore, it was purpose. A blueprint for truth. That's when I realized I wasn't fighting for the house. I was fighting for the meaning behind it. Over the next few days, Harriet and I built our case. Photos, voice messages, emails. Every nail in place, every line squared to truth. She said it reminded her of working crime scenes again. I told her it reminded me of framing a roof. Everything needs support or it collapses under its own weight. In between all that, I still worked in the shop. The smell of sawdust kept me grounded. Sometimes Lily would wander in after school, curious about the blueprints spread across my table. "Grandpa," she asked one evening, "why are you drawing our house again?" I smiled faintly, because some things need to be rebuilt the right way. She tilted her head, "Like Daddy's bridge." "Exactly," I said, "except this one's made of truth." She didn't understand fully, but she smiled anyway, that sweet, innocent kind of smile that makes you believe the world can still be fixed. That night, when everyone else was asleep, I stood at my workbench again. I placed the steel ruler on the blueprint and whispered the same words I'd written in my journal. "A true builder never runs, he rebuilds." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the cracked walls of the house. But instead of feeling fragile, it felt alive, like the home itself knew what was coming. I wasn't just fixing what was broken anymore. I was designing justice, one line, one truth, one nail at a time. The courtroom was packed that morning, rows of polished shoes, crossed arms, and whispers that buzzed like static under the fluorescent lights. You could smell the tension, thick as the dust on those old wooden benches. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a spectacle. Melissa sat straight-backed beside her lawyer, legs crossed, her posture rehearsed down to perfection. Her expression didn't show an ounce of doubt. She dressed for victory, navy suit, neat hair, cold eyes. When she glanced at Daniel, it wasn't pity or regret I saw, it was calculation. The judge, Edward Blake, entered and took his seat with the same calm authority he'd carried for years. His gavel tapped twice, firm, final. "Pierce versus Pierce," he announced. "Proceed." Melissa's lawyer stood first, all confidence and polished words. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "we are here because my client, Mrs. Pierce, is seeking a fair and reasonable division of assets and custody arrangements for their child. Mr. Pierce," he gestured toward Daniel, "is tragically no longer capable of providing stability. He cannot work, cannot move freely, cannot." Daniel's hand tightened on his chair's armrest. His jaw flexed. I could see it, that storm inside him, the one he tried so hard to swallow. The lawyer didn't stop. "He can't even walk, Your Honor. My client only wants what's best for their daughter, a home, consistency, and the kind of care Mr. Pierce can no longer offer." The words hung in the air like smoke, cold, clinical, cruel. I saw Daniel's eyes shift, a mix of anger and shame, and before I could stop him, he started to move. His hands gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. The sound of the chair scraping against the tile echoed through the room. "I can't walk far," he said, his voice trembling but strong, "but I still stand for my family." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. For a second, nobody moved. His body shook, his legs barely holding him up, but his eyes were steady, clear. And then someone laughed, not loud, just a sharp, mocking chuckle from the back row. It cut through the air like a nail dragged on metal. Melissa didn't even look at him, she just sighed as if embarrassed. Daniel's legs buckled slightly, but he caught himself. That's when I stood up, slowly, deliberately. "Then let me stand for him," I said. Every head turned. I walked to the front, each step steady, my boots hitting the tile with purpose. I placed my old leather briefcase, the one Ellen had given me before she passed, on the table. The snap of the latches echoed in the silence. Judge Blake looked up, his brow furrowing. "Mr. Pierce, this is not." But then his voice stopped. Recognition flickered in his eyes. You're the builder, you built my house." I nodded once. "Yes, sir, 20 years ago." He leaned back slightly, the shift almost imperceptible, but the whole room felt it, that subtle tilt in the balance of power. Melissa's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this man is not a legal representative. He has no—" "I'm not here as a lawyer," I said, cutting him off. "I'm here as a builder, because this," I gestured toward my son, "this is my life's work, and I'm not about to watch it be torn down by greed." A murmur spread through the crowd. I could feel Melissa's glare on me, but I didn't look her way. My eyes were on the judge. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Blake said slowly, "I remember you. You stayed late on the job even after everyone else went home. You refused to cut corners. You said something I never forgot." I smiled faintly. "That a house built on lies doesn't stand long." He nodded. "That's right." Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant." But the judge held up his hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Pierce." His tone had changed, firmer now, less patient. I opened my briefcase and laid out the files Harriet and I had spent weeks gathering. Bank transfers, photos, text records, all neat, organized, undeniable. "I may not know the law," I said, my voice steady, "but I know how to spot cracks before a structure collapses. And this marriage," I looked right at Melissa, "started cracking the day she decided truth was optional." Melissa's lawyer tried to object, but his words stumbled. The confidence was gone now, replaced with something tighter, nervousness. The judge studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Then quietly he said, "These appear substantial." For a moment the courtroom was utterly still, even the air felt heavier. Daniel, still standing with one hand on his chair, whispered, "Dad," his voice broke. "You didn't have to do this." I turned to him. Yes, I did. Because when the walls of a home start to crumble, a good builder doesn't run, he rebuilds. He swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face. Melissa looked between us, eyes darting like someone trapped in a corner she never saw coming. Judge Blake leaned forward, folding his hands. "Mr. Pierce," he said slowly, "I think you've reminded us all what foundation this court stands on." I met his gaze. "Respect, sir, the kind that can't be bought or sold." He nodded once, almost solemnly. "We'll review the evidence. Court will recess." The gavel struck one sharp hit that echoed through the dust-filled air. As people began to rise, I looked back at Daniel. He'd finally sat down, exhaustion written all over his face, but there was something else there too, pride. Quiet, fragile, but real. Melissa stayed frozen, her mask cracking. For the first time, she looked small. When I closed my briefcase, the sound was soft but final, like sealing a coffin. We walked out together, father and son. The hallway light streamed through the courthouse windows, dust swirling in the air like gold. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shifts, slow, quiet, certain. And that morning, in that room full of dust and judgment, I felt it move. The second day of the hearing started quieter. No whispers, no tension bubbling under the surface, just that thick, heavy kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. You could hear the hum of the ceiling lights, the creak of shoes on the polished floor, even the shuffle of paper from the clerk's desk. Melissa sat there, cold as ever, her lawyer straightening his tie like the outcome was already carved in stone. Daniel looked pale but determined, his hand resting on the table just inches from mine. I could feel the tremor in his fingers. Judge Blake entered and nodded toward me. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "you requested to present additional evidence." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing slowly. "I'd like to start with this." I placed a folder on the bench, copies of the property deed, dated 2 years before Daniel's wedding. "This house," I said, voice calm but firm, "was purchased by my son with money he earned before his marriage. Every plank, every nail was paid for by his own hands. There was no joint contribution from Mrs. Pierce." The judge adjusted his glasses and looked through the papers. He nodded once, the kind of small, quiet nod that says this matters. Melissa's lawyer stood up, too smooth for his own good. "That may be so," he said, "but this isn't just about who bought the house. It's about the family it held and my client's right to security after years of supporting her husband through hardship." Security. I turned toward him, my voice steady. "She was building a future with another man while plotting to take what my son built. That's not support, that's strategy." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Melissa's face twitched. "That's a lie," she shouted. I met her eyes, unflinching. "Then maybe this will help jog your memory." I reached into my old leather case and took out a small flash drive. The courtroom fell dead silent as I handed it to the bailiff. "Play it," I said quietly. The speakers crackled for a second before the recording started. Melissa's voice filled the room, sharp and commanding. "If anyone asks, you say you want to live with me. Say Daddy can't take care of you, all right? Don't cry, Lily. Just say it and I'll buy you that new tablet." Then a smaller, trembling voice. "Lily's. But I love Daddy. I don't want to lie." You could hear the sound of Melissa's sigh, annoyed, impatient. "Do it for me," she said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The recording ended. For a moment there was nothing, no breath, no movement, no sound except the faint buzz of the lights overhead. Then Melissa stood up, furious, her voice cutting through the silence. "He's just a carpenter. He knows nothing about law. You can't." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "I know the weight of truth," I said softly, "and it never collapses." That shut the room up again. Melissa's lawyer tried to recover, fumbling with his notes, but the judge leaned forward, his tone colder now. "Mrs. Pierce, that recording, is it your voice?" Melissa stammered, her eyes darting everywhere but forward. I was under pressure. It was taken out of context. Judge Blake's gaze hardened. "I'll take that as a yes." He looked toward the bailiff. "Bring in the child." The doors opened and Lily walked in holding a small stuffed bear, the same one Daniel used to fix when she tore its ear. She looked tiny under the weight of all those adult eyes staring at her. The judge's voice softened. "Sweetheart, do you know why you're here today?" She nodded. "Because Mommy and Daddy are fighting." He nodded gently. "And can you tell me something, Lily? Where do you want to live?" She looked at her mother, then at her father, and finally at me. Her little hands clenched the bear tight. "I want to stay with my daddy and grandpa." The words cracked something open in that room, not just in Daniel but in everyone listening. Melissa's head dropped. Her lawyer exhaled, defeated. Daniel pressed a hand to his face, trying and failing to hold it together. I felt my throat tighten, the same way it did the day Ellen passed. But this time, the tears didn't come from loss. They came from something else, something like release. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. "That's enough," he said gently. "Thank you, Lily." The bailiff led her back to the hallway, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Then slowly someone in the back began to clap. Just one person at first, hesitant, unsure. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds the sound filled the courtroom, not loud, not rowdy, just steady, respectful, like the sound of rain on a roof you once thought was gone. Daniel reached for my hand, his grip trembling. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking, "thank you." I squeezed back. "You don't have to thank me, son, we're just rebuilding." The judge looked down at the blueprint still sitting on the desk, Pierce v. Pierce Justice Design. He smiled faintly. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "you build houses." "Yes, sir," I said. "Well," he replied, tapping his gavel, "it seems you've built something much bigger here." The final strike echoed through the room, sharp and clean, the sound of something ending and something stronger beginning. As we walked out of the courtroom, Daniel turned his face up toward the light filtering through the windows. Lily ran ahead, her laughter echoing down the hall. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a house divided anymore. It felt like home again. The next morning, the air inside that courtroom felt different, heavier somehow, like the walls themselves knew we were getting close to the truth. Melissa looked tired, but she still had that spark in her eye, the kind people wear when they think they have one last card to play. Her lawyer stood, papers in hand, his voice sharper than before. "Your Honor," he began, "before this court takes Mr. Pierce's testimony as credible, I believe it's important to establish his record. This man," he said, pointing right at me, "was fired years ago for theft, stealing materials from a city project. Are we really going to trust a man with a history like that?" The room gasped, all heads turning toward me. Daniel's eyes went wide. Even Lily, sitting quietly beside a clerk, looked confused and scared. Melissa leaned back in her chair, smiling, satisfied. I didn't flinch. I just rested my hand on the edge of the table and took a deep breath. "You're right," I said finally, my voice calm. "Steady, I was fired, that part's true." You could feel the room tighten, the lawyer's grin widened. "So you admit it?" "I do," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "But you left out the rest of the story." The judge leaned forward, interest flickering across his face. "Go on, Mr. Pierce." I nodded slowly. "It was 15 years ago. I was working on the Riverside Bridge project, the one connecting downtown to the East District. I was a foreman back then. We'd been pouring concrete nonstop for weeks, deadlines pushed, corners cut. And one night I found out why. The contractor had been swapping out the steel beams for cheaper ones, pocketing the difference. I confronted him right there on site, told him I'd report it. I paused. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the faint click of someone's pen against the desk. The next morning, I continued. I was fired. They said I'd stolen materials, scrap pieces, leftover steel. A lie made to shut me up before the truth got out. They took my job, my reputation, and for a while my faith in people. The lawyer tried to interrupt. That's a convenient story, Mr. Pierce. But the judge raised his hand. Let him finish. I nodded in gratitude. 2 months later, part of that bridge section collapsed during testing. Nobody died because they caught it in time, but if they hadn't, hundreds could have been on that bridge the next day. Cars, buses, families. I may have lost my job, but that day, I learned something that never left me. I looked at Melissa then, her smirk was gone. Integrity, I said, isn't about staying clean when it's easy. It's about standing tall when everything around you's trying to make you kneel. The judge's face changed, recognition dawning, slow but certain. He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer. Wait, he said. The Riverside Bridge, you're that Samuel Pierce. I blinked, unsure. I don't know what you mean, sir. He looked down at his notes, then back up. 15 years ago, there was a report filed, anonymous tip about faulty beams and bribery on the Riverside project. That report was sent to my office. I was a district judge back then. That report triggered the investigation that saved the bridge and every life that might have crossed it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Melissa's lawyer turned pale. The judge's voice softened. I never knew who sent it. You just signed it, a builder who won't bend. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I said quietly. I was just trying to build something that wouldn't break. The judge nodded slowly. You did more than that, Mr. Pierce. You built a city's safety and reminded men like me why truth matters. Melissa's lawyer sat down, speechless. Melissa herself was frozen, staring at me like the ground had just shifted under her feet. The judge looked to the gallery. Let the record show, he said, voice firm, that Mr. Samuel Pierce's character is beyond reproach. He acted with integrity at great personal cost, and his actions directly prevented a tragedy. The courtroom went quiet for a beat, and then it started. Someone in the back stood and began to clap. Then another. Then a third. Within seconds, the whole room was on its feet. The sound wasn't wild or chaotic, it was steady, respectful. Daniel's head dropped into his hands, shaking, not out of shame this time, but relief. Lily stood up on her little chair, eyes wide with pride. I didn't move, didn't bow, didn't smile. I just stood there, letting the sound wash over me, every clap, every echo, every breath. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, trying to bring the room back to order, but even he was smiling now. Mr. Pierce, he said warmly, the world could use more builders like you. I nodded. Thank you, sir, but I'm not the only one. My son's been rebuilding his own foundation for years. I just came to help him find his footing again. Daniel looked up at me, tears in his eyes. You already did, Dad. The judge leaned back, his expression soft. Then maybe it's time we rebuild this family too. That line hung in the air, heavy and full. As the gavel struck, people began to file out slowly, quietly, like they just witnessed something bigger than a legal case. Something human. I stood there for a moment, running my fingers over the old scar on my hand. The one I got the night I caught those fake beams. It had healed long ago, but the mark never left. Funny thing about scars, they don't fade because they are ugly. They stay because they are proof you stood for something worth the pain. That's what integrity is. It's not about never falling. It's about standing up again, even when the whole damn world's watching to see if you'll break. The final day of the trial felt different from all the others, calmer, like the storm had finally burned itself out. The courtroom was quieter than usual. No whispers, no murmurs, just a strange stillness. Even Melissa, sitting there in her pressed suit, looked smaller somehow, like all the fire had gone out of her. Judge Blake shuffled the papers in front of him, then looked up. His voice carried through the room, clear and steady. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court finds in favor of Mr. Daniel Pierce. You could feel the collective inhale. He continued, the house at 214 Riverside Lane remains the sole property of Mr. Pierce. Custody of the minor, Lily Pierce, is granted jointly to Mr. Pierce and his father, Mr. Samuel Pierce. Daniel froze. He blinked once, twice, like he wasn't sure he'd heard it right. Then his eyes filled and he let out a shaky breath he'd been holding for months. Beside him, Melissa didn't move. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't hear him. She was staring at the floor, eyes empty, lips trembling. The judge gave a final nod. Court adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the air like thunder breaking into sunlight. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lily slipped down from her chair, ran straight to her father and wrapped her arms around his neck. He hugged her tight, tears falling silently into her hair. I stood behind them, my hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. My son, the boy I'd once taught to measure wood, now standing taller than me, even sitting down. As we turned to leave, Melissa looked up. Her makeup had smudged, but her pride was still hanging by a thread. She tried to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to lash out again, I couldn't tell. But before any words came, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, then went pale. Derek Sloan, her perfect man, her escape route, had sent one message: "Don't call me again." Her hand fell to her side, and for the first time she looked human, not cruel, just lost. We walked out into the daylight, the courthouse doors swinging closed behind us. Lily was skipping between us, her small hand holding mine. The sun hit her hair, turning it the same shade of gold her grandmother's used to be. After a while, she looked up at me and asked softly, "Grandpa, will you build again?" I smiled, not the polite kind, but the one that starts deep in your chest and works its way out. "Yes," I said, "but this time I'll build hope." She grinned, satisfied with that answer, and skipped ahead toward the truck. When we got home, the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It breathed again. The light through the windows looked different, gentler somehow, like it had been waiting for this moment too. In the backyard, I found an old apple sapling I'd been meaning to plant, just a small, fragile thing. Daniel wheeled himself to the porch, watching as I dug into the soft earth. Lily knelt beside me, patting the dirt with her little hands. "This was your grandma's favorite tree," I told her. "She used to say that if you plant one with love, it'll feed generations." Lily tilted her head. "Even after we're gone, especially after we're gone," I said. Daniel laughed softly from the porch. "You and your metaphors, Dad." I smiled without looking up. "You get your stubbornness from me. It's only fair you get some wisdom too." He rolled his eyes, but there was warmth behind it. When we finished, I leaned on the shovel and looked at the tiny tree standing proud in the sunlight. "There," I said, "every home deserves something growing beside it." That night, the house felt alive again, like it had forgiven us for all the shouting, the silence, the heartbreak. After dinner, Daniel asked me to come out to the workshop. Inside, he'd set up the wooden frame I'd built for him, a walking aid I'd carved out of oak. Solid, simple, built the way I used to build everything, to last. He stood between the bars, gripping them tight. Sweat broke across his forehead as he tried to take one step, then another. His legs shook, his breath hitched, but he didn't stop. Lily clapped her hands softly. "Go, Daddy." He smiled through the pain. "Trying, sweetheart, trying." I stayed behind him, just close enough to catch him if he fell, but he didn't. He kept moving inch by inch, his reflection catching in the window beside the little apple tree. And in that reflection, I saw everything: loss, struggle, pride, love, all of it blending into something stronger than any foundation I'd ever laid. When he finally reached the end of the frame, he turned back to me, exhausted but grinning. "You see that?" he said, breathing hard, still standing. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Told you, son, we build things that last." He looked at me for a moment, then said quietly, "You didn't just build this house, Dad, you built me." I didn't have words for that. I just reached out and put my hand on his shoulder, that same hand that once guided his when he first learned to hold a hammer. Outside, the sky was turning gold, the apple sapling swaying gently in the evening breeze. For the first time in a long time, everything felt balanced, solid. Justice had been done. But more than that, peace had been rebuilt, not in the courtroom, not in the papers, but right here in this house. Because sometimes, rebuilding isn't about wood or nails or blueprints. It's about people, about forgiveness, strength, and the quiet promise that even broken things can grow again. And as I watched that young tree through the window, I whispered to myself, "We're home." 10 years later, the river house looked almost exactly the same porch, same creaky step that sang when you walked on it. But everything else had changed. The apple tree out front had grown tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit, bending just enough to brush against the windows of the old workshop. And under that tree, life had gone on. Daniel walked slowly across the yard, each step deliberate but steady, leaning on the same wooden frame I built for him all those years ago. His stride wasn't perfect, but he didn't care. Every step was its own victory, one he earned with pain, patience, and quiet persistence. Inside the house, a television hummed softly. The camera focused on a young woman standing at a podium, wearing a dark blue graduation gown and a smile that could light up an entire town. Lily Pierce, 18 now, valedictorian of her class at Oregon State University. She stood before hundreds of students and families, her voice calm but sure. "When I was little," she said, "I used to think justice was something only judges or lawyers could give, something written in books or locked away in courts. But my grandfather taught me different." Her hands gripped the edges of the podium as she smiled, looking down for just a moment. "He told me that justice is like wood. It bends under pressure, it creaks, it groans, but it never breaks, not if the foundation is strong." The audience was silent, listening, really listening. "My father taught me courage," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "and my grandfather taught me truth. Between them, I learned that integrity isn't something you inherit. It's something you build piece by piece, choice by choice, every single day." A pause. Then she smiled again, softer this time. "So, to every builder out there, whether you build houses,